Ranger Rejects. No, I will not use this localization name. it's
Yeah, we may have used it for hashtag purposes, but that is it. No one
Dude,
calls it by its localized name.
it's so silly. I get what they were going for with it, capturing the nostalgia when we're in this era of nostalgia for like the Mighty Morphin era especially. But it's such a silly name. But this is like the great starting point for diving back into like Toku and Sentai if you've kind of like wore out your welcome in that like Nickelodeon style, Power Rangers part, I guess is the way we'll describe it here.
Yeah, and even if you aren't like super familiar with Power Rangers, you'll still get a lot of enjoyment just by understanding the basics of what Power Rangers is because the series is pretty approachable for like everyone, but I think you get an extra layer of appreciation if you know about Power Rangers.
Yeah, it's essentially like the basic premise is the like plot line is like what if the Rangers were assholes? Because like they seem to be the anti-hero slash douchebag influencers of this universe, which feels weird to say, but for copyright purposes, like obviously not going to throw panels up here to like show anything because we do not want another strike. but
Yeah, and part of the reason like some video ideas haven't been thoroughly thrown out there is because I'm questioning how to edit them in a way where I don't have to use copyrighted material because I'm quite afraid of what these manga publishers can copyright strike.
well, I can tell you safely now that even vaguely humming the Gregorian chant from Halo will get you a copyright strike.
Yeah, that sounds right. But continuing on Ranger Reject, this series, yeah, starts out with the idea that these weekly fights, kind of like weekly episodes of Power Rangers, are happening IRL with Rangers and Putty like monsters. And we kind of are just following along with that until we realize that a lot of this whole thing is just an act. There is the invasion that had started like 13 years ago is just ended like within a year. But the entire facade has continued just for the sake of funding the Rangers. So it's a whole, and we delve deeper and deeper into the conspiracy of this through the eyes of one of these minion characters known as Foot Soldier D. They're called Foot Soldiers. And he basically disguises himself as a human because foot soldiers in this world can disguise themselves as things, objects, and people. And he infiltrates the Rangers. So it's kind of just like a fun way to look into this society through the eyes of what would have been like a minor minion and in any other series, as well as just kind of like watch them slowly realize what's going on in society, which even to this point in the story just gets crazier with the twist.
Oh yeah. So I was doing a little bit of rereading because I started reading this like in November, during like the peak season for where I used to work. And I'm like, I really do enjoy the series, and I approached you guys with like the idea to film this video, but it had been so long since I read like the beginning chapters and everything, so I went back through and read what's been localized here, um, having got caught up like relatively recently. And you notice like the foot soldiers in general seem to be like the more interesting characters because they have that ability to like mask themselves and do all these crazy things. But what I really love the most out of like the foot soldier lore is in the training arc, like the like exam, which is like in the volume that comes out in like 7 days here as of the time of recording. The, the I guess we'll call it the Rita Repulsa of this universe looks like eating chicken. um, but like when he's first introduced here, he's kind of like captive in this base, or is just kind of stowed away in the base where they're holding the exam. And his initial form looks like the tree of wisdom kind of thing, and then he just morphs into this chicken thing that can split itself off into like multiple entities. And the right before we started this call, I got back up to like chapter 50, where he's got the little tiny chicken thing right before the dream chapter where they're like doing the I guess like the what if the foot soldiers won thing. I just love the absurdity of the foot soldier universe. um so yeah, it's an interesting premise though, like you said, like viewing the world through their eyes, because you don't really see a lot of series go through the villain's perspective too much, other than like I guess you would say like My Hero Vigilante did something like that. But other than that, there's not a lot of these mainstream series that do things like that.
And honestly, Vigilantes really technically didn't do that. It was more just like it's basically like the street. You know how in comic books they're basically like
Yeah,
these like high universe level threats, but then there's like street level heroes as well.
yeah, your
Like this is basically
Daredevils
the
and
street level. Yeah, like Vigilantes is the street level crime effectively.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean I don't want to get too into that because that's Vigilantes and
yeah.
we're doing a Ranger Reject.
I like to
But
use the
yeah, I
closest
also want to.
comparison there. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I also wanted to bring up like when we were like thinking about even just the thumbnail for this series, the one thing we really want to get across is this series in and of itself has a lot of fights going on because it's a shonen, but the fights themselves are incredibly engaging because of how like the powers work in this universe. Because like the foot soldiers, like I said, can transform into anything and they can regenerate and are effectively immortal unless they're attacked with a divine tool. And because of that, our main character has all kinds of tricks and abilities and schemes up his sleeve, which is fun to follow. But in addition to that, the Rangers themselves have quite a variety of weapons as we learn over time. And that helps keep the fights more engaging. Because at some point, like, being strong in this universe doesn't mean anything. Because in the exam arc, which I think both of us were rereading yesterday, like the feats of strength that these apparent humans have are insane. Like
Yeah.
even before they transform, and I forgot a lot of this later on just because
Oh
I'm so
yeah.
used to.
You having been going through and watching every season of Power Rangers, outside of this video, like we're on Turbo right now. Like I forgot how just ridiculous the feats in that universe are for just your traditional human. Like they see monsters on the daily, to where like they just get numb to it. So it makes sense in this genre of, I guess, shonen, like the subgenre of shonen here, where you're taking, cues from Toku that just humans are insane, but in this universe, like just in that arc alone, like you're saying, like you see them like modify their weapons and unlock like abilities they wouldn't be able to until later on, until they advance more, where they're just whipping around like freaking beam swords like crazy. I'm like, what the? This is just like a normal civilian, basically. Oh, right, this is Toku too, so it makes total sense.
Yeah, and I mean another thing I remember right off the bat is when they got to the final exam, and we were trying to keep as minimal spoilers as we can, just for people who have either not started the manga, plan on watching the anime, but these are going to be isolated without context for your benefit. There was one time in the exam when they were going after each other, and then while the characters were distracted, someone just drove a truck with somebody, and they're like, "Huh? Do you think we went overboard?" But nah, she was
Perfectly
fine.
fine, box truck versus human. Normally, box truck wins. This universe, no. It's like getting
And like most of these guys are still like children, like young adults to like high schoolers. Like one of the strongest people in this verse is like high school age.
and not to mention like one of the dragon keepers, which is like like the suited versions of these, like the what you would call your main 5, 6 heroes in a traditional like Power Rangers, is typically in a wheelchair. The second they morph, more or less, they're standing on their own. It's crazy, man. Like I love the absurdity of this genre so much because it just allows so much freedom to work with. But at the same time, you have to be able to suspend disbelief if you're going to get into, this genre too, because Turbo, for comparison, like was one of the seasons that nearly tanked Power Rangers because they had like a 12-year-old being a main hero in it. So now that we've progressed to this, where everybody can be a hero era, where it's more acceptable, we don't have that so much. But if you're just going deep diving into this, you're going to see the insanity that Toku/Power Rangers will get you into. And once you start, there's really no stopping. And it just gets crazier as the series goes on, like you were saying too. Oh man. But
But uh,
go
the
ahead.
other on top of the series has like really great comedy, I think, as we more or less explained, but there's also like a lot of very smart writing in this series as well, because like the mystery elements are extremely well layered as well as the character development. And that's another reason I wanted to reread the series, because so many things when you go back take on whole new context once you realize things about the characters. Like when we first meet the Dragon Keeper, which, as Vex said, they are basically our main rangers of the series. They are various personalities, let's say, and the backstories of why they are the way they are, or well, so yeah, to some extent, why they are the way they are very, very interesting by themselves.
Oh god, yeah.
And we realize that there's so much inner conflict within this, hero society, like more so than you would expect, like multiple different factions, and like people have various degrees of knowledge about what's going on. For example, as we mentioned, the entire battle between the Rangers and the foot soldiers are just literally for TV purposes. It's for sponsorships. It's for giving the Rangers a heightened place in society, and also probably some corporate stuff, which might be coming in later on. But on top of that, like only a handful of people know about it because, like within the first few volumes, some of like the ranked rangers end up discovering, oh wait, like this stuff isn't real, and have various reactions to some like
Yeah.
turning against the idea, and others cooperating for the sake of keeping things together. And like who knows what is very interesting because the levels of intelligence are also a little all over the place in this
Yeah.
series, with our main character basically being like a complete idiot for the most part, except in like battle. Like he's much like he's like a character from Radiant that I follow named Seth, who is in regular situations very stupid, but has a high battle IQ where they can figure themselves out in a fight pretty well. But then on top of that, like when he disguises himself as a human, he gets discovered like almost immediately by like the first two humans he meets. And then, like right after that, he ends up getting a different disguise and a different role he plays throughout the rest of the story. And like most people, including family members of the person that he was disguising himself as, are completely fooled. And I'm like, how?
Yeah, that's the one thing that really got me is like the immediate discovery. I'm like, oh, so we're going to, warp to another person's perspective in this universe, possibly, because he's just going to get obliterated. Nope, not at all. And he gets away with it so well that I'm like, how dumb are these people? And once you get like even further in, you're like, you have varying degrees of like psychoses among like some of the main cast, so to speak. and then you have like the people that just want to live their day-to-day lives, like your NPC level people, like I don't care if this is fake, I just want to earn my paycheck, have a happy life, and be numb to it all. And then you have like the characters that kind of want to play both sides against each other for their own benefit. It's a very intriguing multi-layered story going on as you get into like the how far this facade has been going on, and how they kind of just dive into this multi-layered, just complete shit show that has become the universe here. And I'm very curious, like once we get further on, like we're at 90 chapters that have been translated, most of them via scan sites, obviously that's how we were able to get ahead so much. But I'm very curious, like once we get into the more corporatized side of it, how far it actually goes down the rabbit hole. Because so far it's got me being my like one non-jump title that I'm really keeping a close eye on, just because of how well written the story is for something that normally is written as like monster of the week, because that's typically how like a Power Ranger style story is. It's like monster of the week with a little bit of plot. This is like a deep lore and embedded in that kind of story where it's just like, well, shit, now we gotta go fight the invaders because we gotta keep this up. I will say, like, there's one particular moment here that I really do want to get more into, and that's how well in this arc that's been localized, X's was written. Because that's a character that I think is very interesting for what's currently been localized, just simply because they seem to know a lot more than your average foot soldier would. Um, and that's something that we really didn't get a lot of, because the like at least early on, like to most of the foot soldiers, they thought the executives were gone, but X's seemed to be like right on the money with this. Like, here is the executive, here is all of the things that need to be done, and then how easily that final moment in the exam arc is, where like the executive broke out and we start seeing like what's going to be unfolding now in the story. It's very intriguing for that side of things. What do you think?
Yeah, X's was a character I honestly was expecting to be more for the sake of comedic relief than anything, or slash potential love interest for another character. But
Right.
won't get too much into that because it's kind of a weird relationship. Um, but right now, X's is playing a much bigger role in like the current arc, especially
Yeah.
with the last chapter that I read, which I'm just gonna, of course, leave vague. But
Exactly. That's why I'm
at
trying
this
to like
point,
play the middle ground here, so like people want to hop on the localization can. But also, yes, there's a lot more going on too.
yeah, and so right now X's has like made some big decisions for themselves, and we're kind of figuring out what they want to do, like in their role in the world, because like that's been kind of their character arc.
Hmm.
And I do enjoy like how like multiple characters kind of have like their own like little storylines we follow. Like, because D is the main focus, of course. Like with most stories, are we follow our main character, but and probably is the most interesting character arc. But we also follow a lot of like specific characters as we learn about who they are, how they got here, and what they want to do. Like some of like the especially the second in commands, or JFC as they're called, junior first class. They have like some very interesting storylines as we follow their character arcs, and at varying degrees of psychosis, as Vex mentioned. And right now we're seeing them take on some interesting roles in the story as well. So, like with X's, yeah, I don't I feel like they know a lot more about things that happened after the split between the foot soldiers, which really wasn't brought up at all, like
Yeah.
up until we met X's. So I'm curious like exactly what happened to the rest of her comrades that she had, because I don't think we know that.
That's something I was going back through and trying to like, was there any hint of that? Because once I got caught up, I'm like, did I miss something? I know I don't have the the world's greatest literacy when it comes to manga sometimes. Like, I obviously like make nicknames for a lot of the characters we follow, like Top of the Verse, etc., etc., Hot Topic Girl, whatever, for like Promise Neverland. But like, when it comes to Toku, I seem to like have a lot more going on up there because I love that kind of story. I'm like, there has to be more to this, but there really wasn't a lot dug into there. But what's really curious is like, once we get into, like you said, the junior first class and they're like splitting story arcs and everything, um, and X's like their current position, I really am intrigued now with the fact that we have all of these like mini branching stories paths we can go on, and it dives a lot into like the roles that each division has within the society of the Rangers, so to speak, like pink being this, yellow being this, etc., etc. But you also have, the fact that now that it's more open, this isn't such a hidden secret. You have the fun bits of like where their loyalty is going to lie in this universe. And now, post what we have localized here, it's going to get even more crazy as the volumes start getting released. I think it'd be safe to talk about like the next little bit of the story, like volume 5 and 6, because they come out in the next couple months. But there's also the fun bit with D now. We have the interesting like lore for him, where we have all of these disguises he's utilized throughout this. I would not be shocked if he's able to fake his way to the top at this point. Like, straight up, like, I'm imitating somebody that we've, faced more or less on the high end of power without getting too deep into, like, potential spoilers. And I find that absolutely hilarious that we have a fake it till we make it moment possibility. um, but it's just the complete, utter hilarity of what that power can bring to me that's kept me on edge. How about you?
Yeah, I am glad you brought up the different roles each battalion has in society because I did want to get into that a little bit because like with Red, it's like the one we learned about like the first. They fight foot soldiers for the
Mm-hmm.
most part because at the beginning of the story, um, foot soldiers were like the only thing we are aware that exist in this world. And then blue is also like a generally straightforward branch when we learn more about them during the exam arc, like what their whole deal is. But right, and then of course green is right after the exam arc is like the one that is our primary battalion that we follow, which I honestly wasn't expecting when I started the story,
Mm-hmm.
so that was a nice surprise. But so the ones we don't know much about are like pink, which I'm not sure when we'll get into, but yellow is who I am most interested in because they have like the most skeletons in their closet.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of like the big things going on in the universe, even the stuff that we don't fully know about, are connected back to Yellow Battalion, which like to give people a quick preview, like yellow is basically the intelligence division,
Yep.
pink's like logistics, green. They're supposed to be like the secret ops, and what
Yeah.
they deal with is kind of like kept under wraps until after exam arc. And then like red just fights foot soldiers, like I said. And then blue kind of is like managing the foot soldiers at this point. Like, so yeah,
Yeah.
they're kind of
It's
finished.
I pulled up like the from the wiki here. Like, red is frontline, obviously. Like, you know, first to go out, whatever, beat the hell out of everybody, come back. Blue, command is essentially their role, where they just, you know, like you said, like essentially micromanage the everything going on. Green, stealth. Yellow is intelligence and R&D, which is the other part of it that really intrigues me with yellow. Is like how much of the manufacturing of the divine tools and what that actually, the skeletons that come with that in particular, is going to be an interesting development. Because as we've seen, like the fake divine tools take a heavy toll on the people that get to utilize them. We saw that early on, how it basically like it consumed one of the nobodies, the no ranks. And then medical is pink, where they just, patch up anybody that gets hurt or provide the logistical support as well. It's very, very funny that in the wiki here, though, it does say that they're covering up all invader related incidents that occur outside of the Sunday battles as part of their role, too. Which is just.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure if I remember that, but okay.
Yeah, I
Because we
don't
do know there
remember.
are rogue invaders
Right.
every now and then, especially after we meet X's. But
It,
yeah,
it's it's interesting because like we haven't seen a whole lot of what they do, but you're right. Like that, we've had those rogue invaders, and obviously that's one of the bits I was getting to, like with the divine tool consuming the no rank early on when they were chasing our main character right before the exam arc as well. Um, it's funny though, like with all the logistical crap that Yellow has to have in their closet with developing and perfecting like the use of those. I wonder how many people were just like human sacrifices, so to speak, to you hold this and don't question it.
yeah, human experimentation is definitely some creepy stuff that's going on there in that world.
uh,
But the thing I'm when we also mentioned D's like what his role in the story is, what that is another thing in the most recent chapters I'm interested in because in a series that got axed probably too soon, P6,
mm-hmm.
the main character of that story like he at some point lost like his main goal, and in a way D has also kind of like lost his like sense of purpose at this point in the story. So it's very interesting where our main character will go from here because I wanted to see how P6 would handle such a thing, but it got axed before
And then we
it could
saw the
do that.
the famous meme worthy page where he's just head chopping somebody.
Oh yeah, no, he cold clocked his dad in the face, and it was great. But it's interesting. I mean, without getting too much into it, because we'll probably do another podcast about the manga
Yeah, I'm sure you guys
of
have
Jump.
that in a
Yeah,
future
and like
podcast.
basically P6 was an interesting way to show like this is when a main character just loses, just straight up loses.
Mm-hmm.
But like with Ranger Reject, like D needs to find like a question asked like even in 12 chapters into the story is who do you want to fight? What is your enemy? What's your purpose? And like much of the story is D trying to sort all that out. And now he kind of has to come up with an answer. He's kind of forced to come up with an answer. So I'm
Yeah,
very curious how that'll go.
he's had to question his goal a few times, like even early on in the arc that's been localized. Like he's kind of come to terms with like moments of where does my alliance lie? But now he really does have to have that answer, and it's very interesting that we've kind of come full circle with that because you can only question your morals and your goals so many times before it feels a little bit tried, but you know, in a series where like there is no real good guys, it is very interesting to see like do I go with the total dickheads that control everything from the media state on down, or do I kind of go with the rise up my minions and kind of try and take the world back to some extent side of things, or just where could it go from there is really fascinating in this. But I'm
And
very I'm very interested in like how well the animation is going to handle some of these scenes, especially like fight wise. Because if it's CG, I'm terrified.
oh yeah, if they do CG like foot soldiers or something, you mean, or
Yeah,
like the monsters, yeah, that would look ugly.
especially given like the CG we've seen the last few anime seasons.
Yeah, yeah. Let's hope that doesn't happen. I forgot what studio had it. I should have looked that up before we
I'm looking
recorded.
it up while you say what you were going to say.
Okay, thanks. So let's see. What was I saying? Because I did have a point, but I'm trying to remember. So let's see. I think it was something about. Oh yeah, yeah. So Vex brought up an interesting idea where there's no real good side, and they're the closest character we have to like arguably being like the one good person in a bad world. That is one aspect of the story I'm very conflicted on, because like I guess it's okay. We made the decision it's okay to talk about localized stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the first like two humans we meet or D meets is like one girl who's actively opposed to Rangers for reasons we still don't fully understand, but it's probably some interesting moral complications with her position in the Yellow Battalion. And also like one dude who was raised like by a family that kind of like brainwashed him into like being trying to be as good a person as he can, and he's trying to still figure out what that means. And so like when the point happens when D and Hibiki like switch places. And I thought to myself at that point in the story, okay, so it's going to be like a dual protagonist situation where we follow one guy's story, like infiltrating the Rangers, and another guy's story infiltrating like the underground scene of this world, right? But that's not really what happens. Like, we don't really cut back to Hibiki all that often. And like the few times we do, I always think, oh, okay, so now we get to see what he's been up to. Like, what is his plan? What is he trying to do? And at first, I thought it might have just been like the pacing of the series. But given the recent chapter that I read, I think it's just more like his story is like his arc is just about to begin more than following the stories together. So I'm very interested, like how his role is going to be, because he was the closest thing we had to a good person, and right now this society is effectively collapsing. So he needs to do something.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like a studio has been announced. We have a director who has worked on Inuyashiki and Tiger and Bunny, which will be good, given how
Yeah,
well
I
those
love
shows.
Tiger and Bunny, but it's kind of, I don't know if they've ever announced a director that a studio though. At least I'm not used to that.
Yeah, I'm looking at through the trailer right now to see if like it says a studio, but everything I'm pulling up from Mal and various publications of differing, I guess, quality, like even bounding into comics, which is notorious for like biased reporting, isn't saying much. Um, Illuminati isn't saying a studio. But yeah, it looks like it's all regular animation, which is good. I'll take that, and if they keep that, I'll be really happy. I don't want to see CG foot soldiers, and yeah, especially after the last two anime seasons. Like I said, CG's kind of not been a good media, um, especially for something like this. But then again, we have CG Zords now in Power Rangers, and that looks okay. So what the hell? Maybe they could pull it off. Maybe I'm just old. But yeah, you're right. It's weird because we're not really seeing that dual protagonist stuff. Um, we are seeing a little bit of like going back and forth, but not really both of them being the role. It's an interesting premise. It's mostly just being D's story along with now, like we said, without getting too much into it, we're following a little bit of like the JFCs, and it's got me thinking like, will we ever get to like where we're at that like dual protagonist role, or will we forever be following D?
Yeah, and I mean, it could have just been my expectations were just wrong because this series loves to throw expectations out the window
It
at like
really
the most
does.
crazy times.
It
Because like
really
the
does.
first time we like learn about executives, I was just like, okay, so this just got much more interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's
And
weird
the
too.
power scaling on like this stuff, like just during the exam arc, was crazy because you start out like with just all these rangers, but you're not too sure how strong anybody is at this point. Especially because D just cold clocks. I using that word a lot today. One of like the third class people, like with the cheap trick. So you're really not sure exactly how strong everybody is. But then the exam arc just shows how monstrous like just the non dragon keepers are, And then we see an executive, which can like really only be dealt with if you have a Dragon Keeper on your team.
It's crazy too, because you're right. For like that entire exam arc, it I really expected like you go into a series with some expectations of where it's going to go, even if it's something that's taking inspiration from Toku and Sentai like this. You're like, okay, there's going to be crazy powers. You're going to have, a morphing style. You're going to have, humans being essentially fodder, but also having moments of bravery where they can show how strong they are. And then you have the moments where you're going to have, monster of the week. That was my expectation going into this series. Basically blind, other than the few little bits and pieces I'd seen on Twitter. And then you get into that exam arc, and it is the most batshit insane thing I'd ever read in my, years of reading manga. Just simply on the power scaling alone. And I say it wholeheartedly. Please do not start doing death battles with this shit. Because this is meant as a fucking gag, people. Okay? There is no like the Dragon Keeper can beat Goku. Please don't go down that path. But it is crazy, right? Because you see what looks like the string being that's gonna be the dude that's fixing the gear go up against a dude that is the size of fucking Escanor. Yeah, it's just all over the place. But it's also funny because you have a complete insane variety of weapons and just the like I guess prep time joke of Batman here where you can plan 5-6 moves ahead if you need to because you have like all the cover and you can get really tactical with it. So giving you the ability to see various degrees of power from mental on down to your brute strength onto your gadgets, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, um, but you see the executive versus the Dragon Keeper fight, which I think is the end of Volume 4, and all of that just goes completely out the window. You see reigning just complete, I don't know what to call the Blue Keeper's power. Because I'm rereading that, I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it either. It's just like if it's like I think expected something with water, considering we've met some of the other, well, I don't want to call them Blue Rangers, but I guess Blue Battalion members, and they all had like water-based things, and I'm like, okay, so it's going to be something, but then it's still like the weirdest way to have done water-based abilities.
It's like you're mixing acid armor with bubble from Pokemon. I guess would be one way to describe it. I don't know. I guess the easiest way for a Power Ranger fan to describe the Dragon Keepers is they're like the Morphin Master for that color. Um, so you have like the Master, and then like all the others would be like the offshoots of that battalion. You would have your Mighty Morphin, your Wild Force, whatever you want to go on to, because you'd have different varying strengths of characters in that battalion is the easiest way to go into that with Power Rangers lingo. Um, but it was the craziest power I've seen, and like we saw a little bit of like Red's power early on, but it wasn't you know overly crazy like Blue's, so it was just something that took me by surprise. And then the executive is just what the fuck. Oh man, this series is just crazy, man. But is there anything we want to dive into for potential bringing this back at some point, or talking about it? Because I know you guys will be doing a lot more of the content than me moving forward, but this would be something. When the anime comes out, maybe I could pop in for a video or something like that. Or if we want to keep covering this, I could head in here occasionally. Um,
I mean, I don't know if yeah, if anyone else from like our server is like reading or caught up with it. I mean, that was like part of the reason it was a little difficult to arrange this up because we wanted to be like all caught up with the series by the time we
yeah.
were doing this.
but also
So
playing
like
it
maybe if
safe.
the anime comes out, because I know, like I'm not part of the Ranger watch along you guys are doing, but if the others like want to watch the anime, it's like anime onlys, like it could be an interesting discussion to be had. I would definitely be up for it, especially like how things are adapted after doing some rereading. I'd be interested to see
Right.
how they decide to like adjust the series. Because another thing we were talking about pre-show right before hitting record was that the series has very interesting pacing. Like every like the more I read manga, I realize like the first like 12 to 15 chapters are usually like a giant prologue of sorts.
Hmm.
Like Dr. Stone does this, and this series does it, and a couple other ones. If you've been reading Shonen Jump, you might have noticed this trend where you don't really get into a proper arc until after you introduce a bunch of things. And I
Right.
think Ranger Reject has a very strong set of 12 because it keeps messing with your expectations and like what the premise of the story will be up until like the very end. And at that point, you kind of have a gist of, okay, so I know what's going on, I know what's going to happen. And then right afterwards, which I think will just in the end maybe like the first 4 episodes, maybe.
Hmm.
I'm guessing 4 or 5 episodes, like the first half. Then the next set of episodes are going to follow like the exam arc, which is much more slowly paced because it covers like multitude of volumes. So I'm curious if they're going to like cut some things like short or quicken the pacing, or if it'll just like adapt it as is, and it'll be just like a very interesting situation where a lot of people will get into the series with the first few episodes, but then hopefully like they'll just stick through the rest of the story, much like they did with the manga. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm interested how they'll set that up.
Yeah, just to weigh in on that for a moment here, because having just reread basically 1 through 50 over the last like 3 4 days, which has been crazy, reading 50 chapters that quickly, but then I realized like I've done this before. I do agree, because it didn't used to be like this way with manga back in the old days, back in my day kind of thing. But here recently, like in the era where we get into like the really quick axing that we've been in for manga, you have this prologue bit where you kind of hook the reader, right? You have to have a good chapter one. For this, you had like the story of the invasion and like how that led up to where we're at now in the current society for this universe, and then you have the setup for the whole story leading into that arc, that exam arc that takes like basically 2.5 volumes worth of content, here localized anyway. And that's a really good part for the anime to adapt as a hook for fans of this genre. But it also does lead to this awkward bit if you're reading it weekly or monthly. I think this is weekly, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a weekly series.
Okay. You can never tell because, like we said, we've been reading this on a scan site because Kodansha over here, until here in a few weeks, isn't going to have a way to read their fucking shit legally. And I'm not overly happy with the way they're doing it because they're pulling the manga up style things, where you do the coins and the points instead of just putting it all in a vault like Shonen Jump does. But it is what it is there. So yeah, I've been reading it on Manga Clash. I don't know where you read it, but it does have this weird pace if you were to read it weekly, and it gives you this odd moment of like, okay, is this good or is it not good, or but you always are stuck on edge. And I do find that like a really fascinating thing. It's how I feel with a lot of this era's manga is like, yes, it's good, but the pacing seems to be like mixing between like overly fast and then overly slow. If you've noticed, like I've fallen off of Black Clover because, regardless of anybody's thoughts in the comments, feel free to attack me. I can take it. This arc sucks. This final arc sucks, because it doesn't know what kind of story it wants to tell. It's going through like a Diet Wano bit where it's also going through this like, we need to wrap up 75 plot points because we didn't do it well before now, and now that we're in a final arc we need to speed things up. So it's just stuck in this weird place. And I'm glad that Ranger Rejects is having that earlier on than later on here. Because if this was like Endgame, I'd be in that same boat with that, you know? Um, but you compare the pacing of a series from like our childhood, like Soul Eater or, you know, Naruto, and it had bits of that like mixed pacing, but it wasn't this egregious. So I just find it interesting in hindsight, especially now, having been in doing content for 6 years, where I've had to go through and read a bunch of series. That we've gotten to this era like where we can actually objectively pull apart at the seams a lot of these series and like, oh, this was a good thing, I wish they'd explored more, and this is a bad plot point that I'm glad they didn't explore. You know, it's just that kind of thing for me. And I hope that once we get to a more digital age, like we were seeming to go to now, that we don't have to rush through things, but we also don't have to take them so slow that we have to set 95 things up that we're only going to resolve 5 of. That's just my thoughts on that. Um,
Okay, so let's see. I had one other like major point I wanted to bring up for Rage or Reject, which is they. As I mentioned, we were rereading this story partially for this video we were doing, but also because, and this isn't something I realized when I talked to the more hardcore fans of the series, but there is a lot of like foreshadowing and parallels of
yes.
this throughout the story. Like in the beginning, like some things that you think are kind of inconsequential or silly details end up becoming pretty important. Just like throwaway lines that people say. Like
Right.
Hibiki's like whole backstory, for example. At first, you just think, oh, okay, this is a pretty just messed up backstory just to give us sympathize with the character and understand why he is the way he is. But then we realize that one, like the executive that was messing with him, is like around still, which was a surprise in and of itself, and that other executives are still around. And then we learn, of course, about like his sister
Mm-hmm.
being the pink dragon keeper, and like even later in the story, like more of like the organization that his family was a part of become important, and that's just from like a story that if you go back and reread, like even D's like, we are in the middle of a fight and you're just gonna tell me your backstory right now. This is not the
It's
time, dude.
it's crazy.
But it's like that goofy story told in the middle of a fight ends up becoming a crucial part of the story and parallels, especially when another character is experiencing much of the same moral dilemmas that Hibiki faced at that time as a kid. So when you go back and reread, or even just like rewatch it when the anime comes out, you'll notice that there's like a lot of things that the author had planned ahead and is setting up the seats for very early on. And like one of those things that when I was rereading yesterday was that Hibiki idolized the Rangers for since he was a kid. But what I didn't realize until I reread it, and this is one of those times where I'm not sure if this is necessarily a spoiler because I'm just kind of pointing out a detail.
Go for it.
So if you're this far into this video, I must thank you, but also this will probably be fine. The Rangers, like, he idolized them, we learned, and then a little later is when we hear about the actual invasion. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So we did know about that.
It's really interesting. You're right, because I didn't do like too deep a dive because I don't like to interact with like full fandoms anymore because it just is a it kind of spirals for me. But what I did, you know, just going through like Reddit comments about it and like just diving down Twitter rabbit holes when I was like putting up like the teaser for this originally and then the new one, like it is interesting like how much foreshadowing is actually in the series. And you're that moment where Hibiki's going through all of the backstory was the moment I'm like, this is going to go a lot deeper, and it really does. And it's not the only moment like that either, where you're just diving full on into this massive world of like how everything is interconnected. I'm very shocked how much foreshadowing is in this just by those like little throwaway lines, as you said. It's crazy. Um, I don't know if this disconnected. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I can hear you.
Okay. I'm like I'm hearing no background. I'm hearing nothing. So I'm like, did my internet just fully die? Because I'm recording this off a hotspot.
Yeah, I swear we had like the most amount of obstacles trying to get this recorded.
Yeah, my internet provider just texted me that they're on their way to give me a new modem. So yeah, that's really fun. That's what we've been going through. But there is one other like interesting thing that I want to dive into before we kind of wrap this up, and I kind of just fully passed the torch outside of like the like Yu-Gi-Oh and the Power Rangers by the era stuff. I would like to say in this video, I think that this will go down as a cult hit series. Just simply by how well they've crafted this massive universe, partially as an homage to Sentai, but are also partially as this interesting deconstruction of that genre. Because you go into a lot of Ranger series, right, and you see, oh, we're playing, homage to like the Green Ranger, right? Because Tommy here in America was always the big selling point for things. Rest in peace, Jason David Frank, yada yada yada. We've been down that road in that. But in Japan, you have the multiple Sentai series, and you see a lot of like Ultraman influence. You see a lot of the Kamen Rider influence in some of the costume designs and the designs for the foot soldiers here. You see a lot of like the Power Rangers designs as well. But inside this, you've always had the Rangers be heroes. You've had Psycho Rangers here in space, where they're kind of bad. You've seen the Dark Rangers, where you have the Wish.com Rangers, as we've called them in the Power Rangers Mighty Morphin video. But you've never really seen where the Rangers take this role as basically a villain, so to speak, while they're also like feeding their own ego. And I really respect the plot line that we have here, where like there's no real good guys in a universe where you've essentially commercialized the being of a hero. So I really do think this will be one of those cult hit series. I don't think it will reach a level of, say, a My Hero Academia or a Dragon Ball Z, but I do think it will hit the level of popularity of, say, a Monster or a 20th Century Boys or something along those lines.
I'd say that's accurate. And also, I'm hoping that, you know, and maybe this isn't something to hope for, to be honest, and I might just be opening Pandora's box here, but like this story has like shown like a lot of cool things you can do with the concept of Power Rangers, and I'm hoping that other series will kind of take note of this idea and maybe find ways to make use of like Power Rangers motifs and themes in interesting ways. Now, the reason that's kind of a Pandora's box is eventually, like everything else, like Isekai and Moe Blob shows, it'll eventually just get generic. But
Yep.
at this point in time, it at least would be a refreshing new wave of content
Yeah.
I would enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, we do have like a Common Rider manga. It's go ongoing. We do also have like a Common Rider comic. We have the Boom Studios Power Rangers line of comics where you have a more dark tone on it. I've talked about them till people are blue in the face, but I will say, like, you're right, that it is essentially a Pandora's box. You do want to see more of this kind of stuff done, but at the same time, we're experiencing superhero fatigue here. Where the Marvel and DC universes are on a massive decline. You're seeing like an uptick in like video game movies, for example, now, like the success of the Sonic movie and the widespread success of the Mario movie. But it comes in waves, right? Once you start seeing the success of one, everybody wants to get in on it, and then it just drains itself dry. I mean, there's 7,569 fucking isekai manga out there and anime, to where like it seems like every possible thing has been done. You have a damn vending machine, a blob, you have a cell phone isekai. It's ridiculous for that, and the moe crap you saw till nobody wanted to do moe. So it really is a catch 22. I do want to see more Power Ranger stuff because I'm a whore for this kind of content, clearly. But until that day comes, or if that day comes, we really don't know how this will really be affected. But I think we've covered most of the things that we can cover without going too deeply into spoilers. Talked a bit about like where we could go from here without diving too deep into it. Talked the localization till we don't really have a lot of that left. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I did have like one last point I wanted to bring up, and I can't talk too much about it, so I kind of saved it for the end. Is the mangaka himself, which like Ranger Reject, like you might think like what has this person done before this, or whether it works, and that is quintessential couples. This is the same author that gave
Right,
us
right.
that series.
I forgot about that. This is the quintuplets dude.
Yep,
Uh,
and I think it's important to bring that up in this discussion.
it kind of makes sense on the designs for the characters then, because you do see a little bit of that influence there. I honestly thought you saved it for the end to say like they've done nothing but hentai.
Oh, that would have been hilarious. But now this isn't a Dr. Stone situation. We're talking about Boichi. Now this is quintessential couples. And like it is, I haven't read or seen quintessential couples. Maybe someday I will. I don't know.
It's worth
But
it,
it's,
but I will say it's not the greatest thing, and I'm going to get murdered in the comments for saying that. But yeah, it's
like
it's
it
a fun
seems like
series.
your basic like rom-com hijinks,
Mm-hmm.
but with quintuplets being the twist.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with that type of content if you enjoy it. I I've been pushing, as Luke has went through like Sword Art Online. I'm like, it's not that bad. It's just the way they localized a lot of stuff. The fan service isn't that egregious in the light novels. I'm just over here like, yes, suffer as we have suffered. You know,
Yeah, that's been great. Hopefully we'll get to that
I
video at
will
some point.
100% be a part of that video, regardless of my retirement, just to watch Luke lose his fucking mind in that.
Yeah, so will I. And also, if he ever gets to alkalization, then I'm gonna also jump on that because that's kind of where I need to pick back up on Sword Art Online.
Yep.
But getting back on track with this, like, yeah, I wanted to bring up the author's previous work just because Ranger Reject to me, I mean, it is a Power Ranger series, but it feels so interesting and unique in the way it's executed and done and dug up that I'm like, it's hard for me to believe that the last thing you did was just like this almost generic looking story about, oh, what are you doing, step bro, kind of series.
It really does devolve into that at points too. Having read part of it and watched the anime with a friend, it's very generic, and that's an interesting point because you can tell, like, look at Oda's actual artwork. Like, he's done beautiful artwork, and look at his artwork in One Piece, right? They're fucking polar opposites. So you do have that ability as a creator to have totally different styles in what you do, but it is an interesting shift in tone, right? Um, but I'm curious, like, if they continue writing, how far down the line they're going to go from here, because they seem to just write what's currently on their mind, and that's a unique style of author to me. Um, so it's, but you do see that art style kind of pull through a bit too. I will say that because you do have this
Yeah, and
generic facey style. Yeah.
And I do want to say that number one, like you said, it's much nicer when authors like have more diversity in their works because like with I was talking about that with some of my IRL friends, and there's like the not Konosuba, maybe it was the Konosuba author, I forgot, but one isekai author like wrote like a bunch of other isekai content, and it's just like this is just like the one trick he can do, and it just like some are just inferior versions of other works. And with Dr. Stone's author Inagaki, for example, like he started writing like a football shonen, then he writes like a science shonen, and now he's doing a business seinen. So like he has like a wide variety of like topics and interests, and seems to be doing them all fairly well. Because I guess the business manga is getting a drama adaptation. And the other point I want to say is like just because something's generic, I don't want to make that sound like it's an insult. Because that smartphone isekai Vex mentioned, I am like one of the 5 people who are excited that series has come back after 6 years, even though it has zero right to do that because it's just my guilty pleasure of a show.
That's why I brought that one up because I knew you were a fan of it, and
Oh,
it's
okay. I wasn't sure if I brought that up in the Discord, but yeah, I love
yeah.
it.
You had mentioned it while we were watching Luke lose his remaining brain cells during the end of season 1B of Sword Art Online.
Oh man, that was just such a cluster of emotions. I'm surprised we retained anything from that stream.
But it
But yeah, like the reason I was surprised with Negi is just because it feels like he has this great way of storytelling that I'm hoping that he continues on course for. Because I'm not sure if he did quintessential couples because that's like something he really wanted to write, and if so, more power to him. Or if it's just that he saw success with the series and he's like, listen, I'm just gonna keep going with this because I need the money, and then in the background, I'm gonna work on like my actual stuff. Because like if he just has diverse interests, then good for him. But if he was just like trying to like buy time for like his actual like I guess for lack of a better term magnum opus, then I hope he's now has enough recognition to keep doing stories like this,
yeah.
rather than just like what sells super well.
Yeah, I mean it's the Horikoshi effect is what I've been calling it lately. Is like you see how humble Horikoshi is now that he's found success with My Hero, but at the same time you can tell, throughout the years he basically has no sense of self worth from being turned down so many times, which is an unfortunate side of this industry as a whole. So I don't know how much was, like you said, like him working on this in the background because Quintessential got popular, or how much of it was like he wanted to tell that story, and he also wanted to tell this story and maybe 3 or 4 others. But it's very, very humbling to see like the like widespread of things, if that is genuinely what has happened here. Like I wanted to tell this, weird, generic but perfectly acceptable, rom com, or how much is the split. It's just weird to me, but I love it. I really do. Um, but like, if for you, you have the super smartphone. For me, I'm a sucker for Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. So like, we all have those series that like they shouldn't have found this much success, but they do. um,
Yeah, and I mean that's because, of course, also like people like us will consume that content
yeah,
because it just appeals
my
to us.
my phone wallpaper is literally Kobayashi. So no, fight me. um,
Yeah, so don't take us as like gatekeepers of quality. It's just kind of interesting that like much like the readership, even the mangakas, is like sometimes I feel like just putting out some nice, safe stuff, and other times I'm just gonna actually like give it my all and
yeah,
give something like Ranger Regent.
it's cool to see stuff like this get this kind of popularity too, where it's getting an anime, because this, 5 years ago, I don't think this would have ever seen anime success to where it would get
Oh yeah,
adapted.
no, I don't think so. Because the way I got into this series, which actually I probably should have brought up at some point, is Project Manga when they were a thing. They had it as like one of their most underrated shonen manga out there, and for me that was Radiant up until that point. So, and I still have it as Radiant, but I remember thinking it's like, okay, I gotta check out this Ranger Reject. I figured it was just gonna be just like a pretty basic Power Ranger story,
Right?
or even
No.
just like a basic flip on the Power Ranger story. But now there's layers. There
Yeah,
was layers.
it's essentially like, to me, because I've read all the Boom comics up to date. I have a subscription to every single one of them, and my wallet fucking hates me for it. I went into it expecting it to be akin to Shattered Grid, like where one ranger turns against the others or something like that, because that was what was popular during that time when this came out. And then there's layers to it, like you said. So I'm very happy that we were able to film something like this where we can kind of push people onto this series while being vague about like a lot of the plot twists, so they can still experience it like we did. But at the same time, I will say, if you are just, a fan of generic shonen, you'll still find something here. You don't have to be a Toku fan or a Power Ranger fan to get it. It stands on its own 2 feet in this medium, and that is saying something for when you come into this. Like, it's a Power Rangers story essentially, but you don't have to be a fan of that to get something out of it. Um, but yeah, I think we
Yeah,
should.
and I want to give a quick shout out also if he made it to this point in the video, Yatogami, because I had, of course, like mentioned in other servers, I was doing Ranger Reject, and he's like one of the biggest Ranger Reject fans I know, and he even asked us like 2 weeks ago, "Hey, you guys do that video yet?" And I'm like, "Nah, we'll get to it, and I'll notify you." So here's
Yeah.
your shout out, man.
Yep, I will. I'll send you a direct link to this because I'm going to start uploading this as soon as we get done recording, because I want to get this process before they come and install the internet replacement shit and possibly knock out the whole building, because I don't know if they damaged the drop
Yeah,
when they were
that's a
working
good
here.
call.
So yeah, I think that's it here. And this is essentially me passing the torch to you and to the rest of the crew, to kind of take over and do the things, because, like I've said, I'm going to be taking my step back from content and just being like the producer here and stepping in, to various little tiny things here and there. So thanks to anyone that made it this far. Definitely check this out. There's 90 chapters out as of recording this. Um, I will say this series was the perfect cap to this. It really was, because with all the other Power Ranger stuff that we've been doing, it was just like a cherry on top, basically. And go support the official release for this. Volumes 1 through 4 are available. You can buy them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc., etc. I will always preach.
Yeah, and I guess we're getting an official app soon, which you can probably support it through as well.
I question how long that'll last, because Konanasha doesn't have a tendency to stick with things. Uh,
Also fair.
like, I remember Azuki being their go-to app, and yeah, fucking hell.
Yeah, Zuki's probably dead now.
They're self-publishing, so I don't know if it's dead, but it's definitely on life support. But anyway, thanks for tuning in to Ranger Rejects, and see you in the next video. Peace.
Bye.